The comely Calliope. Callie played the Calliope atop the Steamboat Queenie 7 days a week, and she was the finest woman in town. She was wealthy. Her family was old money and owned properties and held offices all over St. Anna Louise, and there were statues to her great-great-grandfather, great-great-uncles, and other ancestors as well. Her grandmother was an activist, and her cousins were lawyers, doctors, and politicians. And she also made plenty of money on her own through various sources, including consulting gigs and smart real estate investing, some modeling, and being an only child, had a large sum coming her way after her folks passed. And she hit it quite big in the lottery one week, too. She was fit, a black belt in karate, a survivalist. She won the St. Anna Louise Marathon 3 straight years. She taught free yoga and Pilates classes at the rec center and designed an obstacle course in the city park that she herself had the record for fastest completion of. She also spent 2 years in an Asian mountain temple learning rare fighting techniques from monks of an unknown order. She was smart. She was only 32 but had a law degree, a PhD in philosophy, and was a Rhodes Scholar. She had 3 volumes of poetry published, 2 short stories accepted by the New Yorker, 2 patents, published papers in numerous journals. She was an accomplished modern artist and a concert pianist at a young age. And then, of course, she was beautiful. She was 6 foot tall with perfect pale skin, arcing feet and fit calves, muscular thighs, a flat chiseled tummy and D-cut breasts, straight shoulders, high cheekbones, gorgeous ice blue eyes, and curly red hair that fell in tight helixed ringlets down past dimples of Venus to her perfect ass. And she also volunteered 1 day a week at the SPCA. Nice Mike was a firefighter for the city of Anna Louise, and he was the kindest guy anyone ever met. He was handsome, broad-shouldered. He had a full head of thick blonde hair and stood 6'4". His latissimus dorsi descended from his armpits and sloped into a thin, chiseled waist that grew from a sturdy pelvic foundation atop strong legs like live oak trees. He was noble. He received a football scholarship to State University, but decided to quit the school and the sport after high school due to the violence. Attending a local college instead, Mike stayed in town to be near his ailing grandmother, and he never regretted the decision because what he gained from the last year he spent with her was more to him than anything 4 years of college could have taught him. After receiving his degree in social work, Mike became a firefighter and hoped to move up in their ranks due to his education and his hard work. He saved several lives in his first 5 years of service and won a statewide Silver Axe Award for rescuing a family of 4 and their 3 dogs. He was fun. He had a big laugh that radiated through the room and bounced off the walls several times, affecting all in earshot. His smile stretched across his face like big open arms when he saw old friends, and 3 distinct dimples emerged each time. He drove fast, but he always wore a seatbelt. He was a practical joker, but he always made sure no one was ridiculed. Children loved him for his size and his spirit and his smile. He was spontaneous, charismatic, exuberant. He loved funny films, jokes, comedians, and bellowed his big laugh at them all. And then, of course, he was nice, a ubiquitous nice, in every sentence and every word. Deeply caring, he was born with a gift of empathy that permeated all his personal relationships. He listened to everyone's story, even the meek, even the wretched. He spoke earnestly and looked people in the eyes without challenge, aggression, or any facetious attempt at flirtation. His mother described him as a loving, affectionate child, and as he grew, that affection spread to all his friends and family, whom he constantly requested dinners or coffees and beers from. His father described him as respectful and courteous, a gentleman. He was also amazing in bed. Joy was Nice Mike's devoted girlfriend, and she valued more than anything their carefully planned life together. She was pretty, a freckled face with round cheekbones and haystack blonde hair cut in a sensible bob. Her freckled face decorated her hazel eyes and her petite nose. Her shoulders were neither too broad nor sloping, and when she slung them back, her favorable C-cut breast emerged just slightly, depending on what she wore. She stood a petite 5'4", and throughout her life was described as cute. She was smart. She made average grades in high school, and she endured her parents' divorce, but rebounded in community college and eventually became a nurse at St. Anna Louise General Hospital. She began several programs that resulted in higher patient reviews and less adverse outcomes. She constantly continued her education by reading journals, getting more certifications, and keeping up with correspondence from medical organizations for the entire hospital. She taught herself to work on her own car by watching internet videos, attended and gave feedback at parish commissioner meetings, wrote for a local culture website in perfect punctuation, and organized several groups in the community, and always won at Scrabble. She was supportive. Even though her father caused the breakup of her parents' marriage, she said she forgave him and supported his second wife and their new love. And the last words she spoke to him before he died were, "I love you, Daddy." She spoke to her mother every day, and though the conversations grew tedious, she never once let disinterest or boredom appear on her face, even as her mom died in hospice, repeating the same hallucination over and over again. She was always the one to organize showers, birthday parties, benefits. She spent several hours a week helping friends or even acquaintances move, go to the airport, organize their lives. She told Nice Mike she loved him every time he left for work and watched sports with him at night, even though she didn't have much interest in it. She always told anyone around her to always do the best they could, and if they did so, they could never feel that they should have done more. She was strong. After falling from a tree as a child, she was in a coma for a week, and the doctors said she would likely have permanent brain damage, but once she emerged, she recovered swiftly. And after that, she would occasionally have seizures, but in time she learned to bring them under control by always staying healthy and hydrated, avoiding drugs and alcohol, and most importantly, controlling her stress. Though Mike's job was dangerous, she never worried, even when a colleague was paralyzed when a floor fell through. Though she often saw her patients die, she always compartmentalized her grief for them. Though the children in her after-school programs revealed their traumatic home lives, she consoled herself that she was getting them the help they needed. She also made the best gumbo in town. For the first 18 months of their relationship, Joy and Mike had a passionate, exploratory love. They met at the hospital as he was getting stitched up from an on-the-job injury and plunged headlong into their own testosterone and oestrogen. They fucked for hours, either on his stripped bare-bones box spring and mattress, or her sleigh bed with overstuffed pillow-top mattress set and feather comforters. His ceiling was low, and even in her petiteness, she could put her palms on it and thrust her pelvis down on his cock with joyous vigor in reverse cowgirl. She loved him being so much larger, stronger, and more forceful than her. And when she was under him, there was a safe, sultry submission. After morning sex, she was stimulated, feeling him in her panties throughout the workday. He was empowered by the scent of her in his mustache and beard as he went through his daily routines. They had a little special song, a jazz standard called Every Little Bit of Me, and they played it on every little bit of me. Every little bit of me. And they played it on every jukebox and requested it from every band. It wasn't long before the dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin became unbridled deep within them, and they would each fill their quiet thoughts in the negative space with thoughts of each other, and the pheromones must have become airborne because wherever they went, waiting for their table at the brew pub, shooting pool in the dive bar, enjoying their espresso at the coffee shop, folks would comment on how truly in love they appeared. And it was true. They were. Like addicts, they sought to immerse themselves in the drug of one another, and this led to their cohabitation. They delighted in their mutual choices of decor, utensils, bath ensembles. Joy knew that she would sleep in Mike's arms every night, and he knew he would turn over and see her freckles scattered in the sunlight of their bedroom window every morning. They would be there for one another when they came home from work, would divulge the tiny triumphs and trials of the day over Pinot Grigios and IPA beer. Some nights he would cook, and some nights she would, and some nights they would go out, and some nights just leftovers or catch as catch can. But most important would be the company and the lines at St. Anne Louise Power and Energy while pumping gas at the post office. The more mundane moments in life were made less so by their being there for each other, for one another, attached. And some nights or mornings they played Every Little Bit of Me to remind one another of their love. But then gradually it slowed. They began to rely on their goals and their plans for a meaning to their lives. And with the hospital and hiring freeze and no promotions, and with the fire department at odds with the city over budgets, pensions, and wages, their dreams were also put on hold. But together they had a hope, and every time each of them heard every little bit, see, I went and changed it. The song went from being every little bit of me to every little bit of you. I think every little bit of you sounds better. Their dreams were also put on hold, but together they had hope. And every time each of them heard every little bit of you, it reminded them of their dream together. Mike's passion had become resolve, and his dedication to her remained strong. He loved her still, but the romantic mystery of love lagged. But not for her. He was all she ever wanted, and was all she had ever loved, and would ever love. Despite what he said or how her friends advised her, she had it set in her mind that they would be together, or she would be alone for the rest of her life. These were her terms, with herself, to her friends and family, and to Mike. They would marry and be together forever, or she would die alone. Slowly but surely, though, they began to blame one another for each of their own problems, and Mike, in his deepest, most buried thoughts, maybe wanted something new, but Joy dug right in, and her commitment stayed their course. Neither made a move. Until Mike decided what they needed was a show of love, a display that would reconstitute their bond, and a symbol to signify it. He was to propose, and he chose a sunset cruise on the steamboat Queenie to make it known. Every summer evening at dusk, rays of sunshine would glimmer across the waves of the Beauce Fleuve. Beauce Fleuve. It means muddy river in French. bows flew, and Callie would play her songs, and bliss would fall over the passengers of her family's steamboat, the Queenie. As the tourists from out of town boarded the steamboat for their tours on the river, Callie sat atop the ship and hammered out the songs that traveled over the buildings of downtown, and then through the streets and the neighborhoods of uptown, enveloping every nook and cranny in the city and reverberating from them again and again. For a few short moments every afternoon in St. Anna Louise, everyone heard Callie play her Calliope. There in the middle of it all, she was a goddess, a divine deity in her majestic kingdom. So came the day when Joy and Nice Mike went along with his visiting brother and sister-in-law on board the Queenie because it was something visitors to St. Anna Louise did. Even though many evenings as they sat on their porch, overlooking the oak-lined street they lived on, Joy would complain incessantly about the Calliope. She acquiesced to go on the cruise because it was indeed St. Anna Louise's best attraction. And that day, moments before Mike was to surprise everyone with his marriage proposal, Mike paid the Calliope player, Callie, a compliment. It wasn't her he complimented, it was her music. He said it was the best thing about living in St. Anna Louise. And for Callie, that was something that she had never been complimented on before. All the doctors, lawyers, athletes, and bankers always complimented her. Not her work, not her deeds, her. And because of that, and because he was handsome and noble and nice, she liked him. And of course, because all men did, he liked her also. "You're cute," said Callie, with deceptively vulnerable look in her eye. And that was that. The proposal didn't go down that day, but a long, flirtatious conversation that made everyone on the Queenie uncomfortable but Callie and Mike did. Their titillation was missed by no one, especially Joy, who had not come into the relationship a jealous type, but their recent tedium and an increasing anxiety and moodiness led to a clinging to Mike that in his less graceful moments he called smothering. And as she laid eyes on the intrigue, she noticed in Mike's eyes a playful fascination she herself had not seen since their romance's beginning. Her heart began to break. Even with the violent crashing sound of the Queenie's powerful paddle wheel against the Bouze Flavou, overwhelming their words with its unrelenting whoosh, 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 Joy could see a dalliance between them. She knew Callie from the magazines and the newspapers around town, and heard handsome men desiring her in the coffee shop conversation on Oaks Boulevard, and she knew instantly that she was powerless to stop it. That day on the steamboat Queenie, Mike, in a matter of moments, saw his life with Joy vanish, and in its place, a life with Callie appear. Athletics, beautiful children in the best schools, healthy and frequent lovemaking, money, comfort, bliss. They would be the toast of the town, the envy of all around. And since he was so good at keeping a secret, only he knew of his pending proposal to Joy. And something in the look Callie gave him, and the spell that she put on him, took possession of him and that ring, as he thought to himself, "I can just give it to her. I can give it to her." The breakup was quick, execution style, Joy's friends called it. He took very little of his possessions and told her to sell or donate them all. He packed one large suitcase up full of clothes and shoes, awkwardly said goodbye as Joy sat on their porch and watched him drive away as the sound of Callie's Calliope bounced off the houses on her block and off every wall of their former porch while she wailed. No one in town knew if there was any overlap between the two relationships, but between the first parade of Carnival and Ash Wednesday, Joy and Mike were done, and Callie and Mike had begun. And since Callie was the most eligible bachelorette in town, it was talked about. Callie and Mike were seen at balls, ribbon cuttings, in the society pages, in the images of newspapers and magazines. Joy saw in each one the unmistakable gaze of newness in their eyes. Instead of the awkwardness of his 6'1" frame towering over the diminutive Joy in a photo or slow dance or photo, now there was a woman there who fit his stature and build, and even her ginger hair blended with the orange highlights in the tips of Mike's beard. And in her increasingly envious, more tortured moments, Joy seethed at the thought of their more suited lovemaking, and she dungeoned herself with thoughts of his developed, masculine arms gripping her perfect hips, or her lengthy legs wrapped around his chiseled torso, of his almost certain ability to insert the fullness of his dick into her slightly more suited pussy. Punishing thoughts such as this penetrated Joy's compromised soul without warning. When she was helping a patient out of bed and the man used Mike's aftershave, or advertisements for her favorite restaurant came on television, or when every little bit of you played on the radio. She began wearing 6-inch heels to try and match Callie's commanding height. Joy was being torn apart not only by her hopelessness after the breakup, but also by its contrast, the exuberance of Mike and Callie's love that showed itself all over town. She also couldn't escape the Calliope. Night after night, she got off work and settled onto her porch with a glass of wine. Her moan of bliss would consistently be interrupted by the bending notes of the steam organ traveling across town to remind her once again that an unstoppable force of a woman sat atop her glorious steamboat playing it, and would spend that night in the arms of the man that Joy loved. She then sought to replace Mike with other men, but none ever fit the mold. She was as disinterested in the disinterested ones as they were in her, and even more so in the interested ones. The one-night stands led to her faking orgasms and quickly conjured excuses why she or they had to leave. And then there were the ones who, after lovemaking, said, "No, wait, stop." And then there was the one who, after lovemaking, said, "He left you for Callie on the Calliope? The steamboat? Yeah, she's fucking gorgeous." The anger grew to hate. What had before been the routine of daily activities were now more and more of a growing stress. All the organizations and groups she belonged to transformed themselves from healthy outlets to unmanageable tasks that stressed her out. Her friends began noticing her struggling, but she made sure to always build a facade around her that portrayed strength. "Is everything okay?" a girlfriend would ask her. "Oh yes, I am still a little down about Mike, but trying to focus on work and putting my energy into positive relationships I have in life. The few that I have," she would reply. "Okay, but it seems like you are in some real trouble. Do you need help, or do you want to talk?" the girlfriend would say. "I would love to, but there's really no time," Joy would say back, without ever really making an appointment or follow-up. She began missing or canceling appointments, dropping out of clubs or task forces, withdrawing from social circles. Doing this saddled her with guilt, and which she channeled into blame. "I don't like the new chairman," she cited as the reasons for quitting the St. Anna Louise Historical Society. "The new bylaws don't give us any freedom," when she quit the nursing guild. "I don't see why I should get expensive stuff when the box is just as good," when ditching wine club. She would stay up late at night drinking, only getting a few hours sleep, and sometimes calling her friends late at night, and within moments of their answering, thinking she made a huge mistake and denying that she was calling as a cry for help. This in turn led to her friends first pleading with her to seek help, and then, after her continual denials, withdrawing from her life altogether. The lack of sleep led to her caffeine and energy drinks that wired her enough all day to keep her energy up, but a growing inability to concentrate at her job. She would get her charts confused or patients mixed up, and her bosses began to notice but were patient. At their urging, she saw someone because she knew what to say, and because she knew what to say, she got a prescription for uppers that would keep her going. And when that ran out, a discharged overdose patient hooked her up with another few bottles. "Callie," the dope fiend said to her as he collected her cash. "Yeah, I went to private school with her. She paid for my rehab. I always had a crush on her." Most evenings she would avoid the porch, but on some defiant nights she would take the wine and step out onto the porch amid the sounds of the Calliope spilling into her neighborhood from blocks and blocks away. By the time they reached her, the notes were bent and twisted, and the songs barely recognizable. This just added to the irritation Joy endured willingly. Some days she felt she just deserved to listen to the Calliope. For not being sexy enough, smart enough, supportive enough, it had to be her fault. So she sat there and allowed herself to be mocked by Callie's alpha female omnipotence. With the stress, drugs, and alcohol, the seizures returned, the first in a bar mid-conversation. "I have 3 more case words to deliver, and I see lights." Then she toppled off the stool and hit her head, which led to, over the course of the next few weeks, more seizures. The next came at work, then one in the car that led to a minor car accident and another minor concussion. She lost her license for 6 months after that one. Throughout all of Joy's pain, there was Mike and Callie, their lives a love song. His love for her growing so strong that he first took an administrative job with the fire department because it was less dangerous, and he didn't want to risk his life or health because doing so would limit his time and enjoyment of Callie. He then quit altogether at her urging. Her money would get him through from now on, and he stopped watching sports, and he doted on her. And he still kept the ring he had purchased for Joy and intended, unpretentious as it was, to give to Callie, knowing she would love it, because even though she was so surrounded with wealth her whole life, she never lost her taste for common things, like Mike. So came the summer solstice, the la longue journée, a day colloquially thought of in St. Anna Louise as the hottest of the year. Mike chose this as the day he would propose to Callie when she returned from her gig that evening on the Steamboat Queenie. Because, in his earnest sensibility, he thought, why not create a happy occasion from a day many people like to loathe? He would dress in his linen suit and meet her at the docks that day on bended knee. But this was also the day that Joy's bosses had had enough. "We have tried everything. We cannot have you treating patients until you straighten yourself out. You are a danger to them, and more importantly, you are a danger to yourself. You need help," they told her. Joy expected it. She saw it coming. She saw it all coming in the last few weeks. The damage to her brain, the drugs and the booze, the stress and the depression, all too much. She lacked the resources to deal with it all. To cope, she drank. And since she was feeling especially feeble, defeated, and weak this particular day, she punished herself with an evening on the porch with Callie's Calliope. As the blue sky began to darken in the east and catch fire in the west, Joy finished up her 3rd glass of wine and filled up the next. The twisted, broken notes of the Calliope began to fill the air as she thought of her hatred of herself, of how she let her man walk away, of how she failed to honor the legacy of her mother and father, of how she allowed herself to become consumed by drugs and mental illness. She hated herself, but when she turned the hatred inward to a point of self-loathing she had never reached before, they suddenly began to transform. With every mangled and warped note that penetrated her soul, her malevolence began to turn towards Callie, the fire-haired hussy who robbed her of her true love. Her rancor and revulsion grew with every gnarled and broken note that penetrated her twisted brain. She imagined Callie's jeweled fingers hitting each of the contorted notes inside her head and thought how fulfilling it would be to break each one at the metacarpal joints. How she would like to rip Callie's head off by her red ringlets and throw it in the bouse fauve from atop her family's steamboat, and how she didn't care if she died also. She would love nothing more than to do that fucking bitch in herself. And as her fury began to climax, her animosity for the universe seemed to coalesce with the rhythm of the music on her porch, and the notes were beginning to drive her mad. She lost herself for a moment in the rage and madness, but she was snapped back into a focused fury as she realized the broken notes were actually a song she recognized. There was a familiarity ringing through it all. The melody was familiar and stirring. The song she was hearing was every little bit of you. A light inside her soul went out, and an inferno of enmity was ablaze in its place. She took her bottle of wine and Mike's Silver Axe Award and followed the broken pitched notes down her street toward the Steamboat Queenie. Callie continued to perform every little bit of you, contently unaware of what was in store for her this evening of Le Long Journée. Filled with wrath and 6-inch heels, Joy stormed past the slacking ticket taker, who protested and called for security, but before the crew of the Steamboat Queenie could sort it all out, she was already on her way to the upper decks with a silver axe and a half-empty bottle of Pinot Grigio as the ship disembarked. She cut through all the tourists and made her way to the very top deck, the one where only Callie and her Calliope were. Once there, Joy found the one long ladder that reached up to the deck, climbed it, and flung it back onto the lower deck. Callie was obliviously laying down the last few notes of an extended version of Every Little Bit of You. Through the volume of the Calliope and just how submerged she was in the song, Callie didn't notice Joy until she depressed the final key on the Calliope and looked up to see a hurled bottle of Pinot Grigio 4 feet from her perfect face. It hit her between the eyes and shattered. Pieces of the bottle flew everywhere, and small pieces of glass embedded themselves in Callie's face. Stinging white wine rushed into the deep cuts, and the blood and the wine flowed into her eyes, temporarily blinding her. Joy kicked off her heels and stormed forward with the axe, moving swiftly and swinging it over her shoulder in one angry movement. Callie tried to stumble blindly out of the way, and the axe hit several of the organ's pipes, puncturing them in several places. Joy lifted the axe and swung it again, and this time it caught Callie's left hand, severing the thumb, middle, and index finger. Blood spattered on the Calliope as the digits fell onto the deck. Screaming, Callie ripped the few remaining nerves and tendons that were pinned under the axe from her hand and pulled away from the pipe organ, making her way to where the ladder had once been. "No, cunt, you can't get away," Joy screamed at her. "There's no escape. I'm gonna throw your red head into the river." Joy didn't recognize her own voice. She was speaking from a different part of herself, a demonic side finally revealed. Joy came at her with the axe again. She swung for Callie's knee, missing it with the silver, but connecting just under the cap with the handle, and all 6 feet of Callie hit the deck like a wet rope. Joy lifted the axe above her head and intended to finish the job by bringing it down on Callie's skull. But the ginger saw through her blurry eyes the shadows of movement in the remaining light of the day and rolled away just in time. The axe buried itself in the deck, and as Joy struggled to remove it, Callie blindly kicked her in the ribs from her prone position with every bit of force she had in her long legs. 2 of Joy's ribs cracked, and she went down. Callie wiped the wine and blood from her eyes and saw the image of Joy there on the floor, gasping for breath. "Bitch with the bob?" she asked out loud. Joy rolled over and looked up at Callie standing over her. She tried to kick her in the pussy, but her little legs didn't quite reach. Callie seized an opportunity and grabbed her by the foot and began to swing her around and around like a helicopter. "Ah!" Joy screamed. The more she spun her, the more dizzy she got, but she knew Joy was getting the worst of it. In a looping motion, she inched toward the edge of the top deck in an attempt to throw Joy into the river head first. The currents being what they were at this particular bend, it would be certain death by drowning. Callie got Joy as close to the edge as she could and let her fly, but Callie's damaged knee weakened the heave, and Joy hit her. But Callie's damaged knee weakened the heave, and Joy hit the rail head first. Her feet flew over the edge, and she was on her way over, but grabbed onto the railing and saved herself. A few foreign tourists on the deck became aware of the altercation and, rather than alerting security, just gawked at it, as if it were part of the cruise, or maybe just how things were in St. Anne Louise. Callie came to the edge as Joy climbed over, grabbed her by her bob with her bad hand, and punched Joy in the nose with her good one, smashing up the cartilage as blood streamed out both nostrils. Callie then slammed her face hard onto the deck. She stood back and let Joy struggle to her feet, swept her leg, let her get up again, then roundhouse kicked her in the face, sending her back down. Again, wiping the blood from her eyes, Callie grabbed Joy with her 1.5 hands and kneed her in the face, cracking her orbital socket. The force of the blow sent Joy back into the air, and she crumpled against the rail. "Why?" she said to Callie, as she writhed on the deck in the fetal position, almost defeated. "Why did you take him?" she cried. "Why?" Callie asked back, and then laughed. "Because I wanted to." Callie picked up the axe and stomped towards Joy, stopping just in front of her. "Because I wanted to." And then she lifted the head of the axe 7 feet in the air, but just before she brought it down, Joy found the broken neck of the Pinot Grigio and thrust it into the Achilles tendon of the tall woman's planted right leg. Callie collapsed, and her head bounced off the deck, leaving her stunned. Joy lurched over to where the axe was, grabbed it, and swung it at Callie's wounded left hand, severing the pinky. Cackling, she bent over and grabbed it and gazed at it for a second, then flung it into the Beauce Flavou. "Bye!" Joy squealed to the flung finger. Callie lay on the ground stunned. Blood stained her white linen dress like tie-dye, her face like red velvet cake. Joy began stomping her, first to the chest, then several to the torso, damaging organs, then a kick up into her face that further mangled and rearranged her nose. With each kick, Callie rolled over herself, a little by little, back to the Calliope, and crumpled under it. She had lost a lot of blood. Joy picked up one of her pumps and followed her, attacking her larger rival in close quarters, jamming the heel into her eye and twisting it, permanently blinding her as blood and intraocular fluid oozed out. Callie screamed in agony. Joy tossed the shoe and grabbed the axe. "Now for your fucking head," Joy said, and, conjuring all the hatred and anger she built up in the last 6 months, lifted the axe and aimed squarely for the wounded Callie's head, determined not to miss this time. Before she swung, Callie desperately reached up to the organ and pressed the keys of the mangled pipes. Steam shot out of the punctures and into Joy's face. Scalded, she screamed and dropped the axe as she endured third-degree burns. Maniacally screaming and clutching her face, Joy retreated to the rear of the top deck. Callie grabbed the axe with her bad hand and used it like a crutch as she advanced towards Joy. Gathering as much speed as she could, she charged Joy and tackled her off the top deck onto the one beneath. They smashed onto it, and Callie's large frame kept her in place, but Joy slid all the way to the rear bulkhead. Tourists scattered. Joy stood up, but didn't notice the statuesque figure hobbling toward her until it was too late. She made a quick attempt to grab Callie's neck, but with her good right hand, Callie lifted her up over her head by the throat, 7 feet in the air over the whoosh, whoosh, whoosh of the paddle wheel. Their eyes met. Joy's surrendering despair met Callie's enduring triumph. "Because I wanted to," she said, and stared through Joy's eyes. A seizure struck Joy as she shook, Callie hurled her onto the paddle wheel. The last thing Joy saw, through the seizure and the shaking, and over the tips of her toes as she fell backward, was a glimpse of Callie's bloodied, ruined face, and she smiled. The first paddle hit her at the base of her neck and separated her spinal column from her cervical spine and smashed 4 vertebrae. The force of this flung around into the spinning wheel again, where she was flung up into the air, and for a few moments before her legs fell into the wheel, and another paddle struck them both and ripped the knees apart, and her legs flung back and forth grossly. Relentlessly, another paddle smashed against her body, and her sternum was pulverized, and she was shoved under the water of the Bouche Flavule, only to be brought up again to the top of the wheel by the force of the next paddle, and her pelvis smashed by still another paddle. One last paddle hit her on the top of the skull, and popped her head virtually off, save the skin, and pushed her so far down beneath the surface of the Bouche Flavule that her body didn't surface for several thousand feet as the sun finally set on La Longue. The Queenie's captain by this time was made aware of the attack and was already steering the ship back to her slip. Ambulances had not arrived. Callie was tended to by the crew, and as the ship was roped off, a tourniquet was placed on her calf, and cotton tablecloths were used to hold her destroyed eye in place. The captain and his first mate carried her over the gangway and onto the pier. Callie was bloody but unbowed. She demanded that she stand and walk with the captain and the mate's assistance. She made her way through the crowd gathered there and heard whispers like, "That's Callie," and "Oh my God, it's Callie." But as she moved through them, there, on the pier, was nice guy Mike, with a bouquet of flowers, a linen suit, on bended knee, with one humble ring to put on Callie's last remaining finger on her left hand, the ring finger.